personally, I never met or interacted or discussed any of my work with Michael. I was sort of brought into the fold afterwards, and Leisha wonderfully invited me on the show. We had a really fun conversation about why women have better sex under socialism and the difference between liberal and socialist feminism and various different things that we ended up chatting about. And so I was really grateful to be invited back to do this tribute. And the one thing I will say that I was really impressed as a scholar, and I'm still the kind of person who tends to get words are my primary form of information. I tend to be a very text-based person. I loved Against the Web, the book. I thought it was a really interesting and necessary intervention against this idea of the dark web and these sort of pseudo-intellectual right-wing idiots like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris, or whatever I don't even know how they brand themselves, but as some kind of like intellectual renegades. And the superficiality of that and the unwillingness to actually kind of do the work. I happen to know a lot of philosophers who work on free will. And Sam Harris's book on free will is so embarrassingly superficial. And yet he somehow markets himself as the person to talk about this topic. So that, to me, the critique of, and concomitantly, Michael's willingness to go deep, right? So he was willing to critique the superficiality of some of these media personalities and YouTube personalities on the right. But I get the sense that in some cases there's a similar critique to be made on the left. But that's not the sense at all that I got from Michael. And I think that willingness to really go to the primary text, to really talk to, go and speak to the horse's mouth, for instance, or whatever, metaphorically speaking, to actually go and engage in this really kind of primary way is really important and really rare in an era of sound bites and Twitter and, fast moving information, where I think what Heidi said about, people toe the party line, not necessarily because they don't want to actually think those issues through. It's because sometimes it's just not available, right? The long history of various debates on the left, which is a long history even in the United States, those debates are complex, especially the relationship between workers' movements and leftist movements and women's movements. I could go back and talk about this in the late 19th century. Some of the conversations, Heidi, that I imagine you had with Michael, probably they had between August Bebel and Clara Zetkin and Karl Kautsky in Germany in the late 19th century, right? The same thing. Lenin and Kollontai were duking it out over whether or not there needed to be an independent women's movement within the workers' movement, right? So these are constant themes, and they're not always memeable. And so I do think that the long form kind of YouTube podcast format of like really being able to get people on the show and talk to people. And for me, this is a new thing. I'll be totally honest, right? I got kind of introduced into the world of podcasts when Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism came out in 2018. And I suddenly realized there was this whole world of knowledge and information out there, and commentary and really thoughtful processing and thoughtful reflection going on the left that was really surprising and wonderful. And so I've been really happy to, even rather late, to be kind of included in this media left, what you call the left media sphere, because I'm still sort of, I have my own little tiny podcast, which is where I like read Alexandra Kollontai in English, translations of her original works, and then I comment on them. But it's like the dorkiest, geekiest thing you could imagine, right? It's a very textually based kind of analysis. And yet I'm surprised at how many young people are like, oh, that's a really fun thing to do, is to sit and listen to like somebody who wrote in 1909 talk about the social basis of the women's question. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us, especially on the left, and especially women on the left, who are committed to advocating and integrating issues of sex and gender as a kind of core principle of leftist activism. And we can do that, and we have to do that by pointing out that history goes back to the very foundations of the left, whether you're talking about Flora Tristan in the 1830s in France, or even earlier with some of the utopian socialists, they were all talking about workers' movements, labor and class, as well as women's emancipation. It was boiled in from the very beginning, and we should never forget that. And I think that it's really important that we're doing this today. So I want to thank you all again for inviting me and for sharing your time and thoughts with me today.